kind of seems like that the system is working. At the same time, we just had Open Source Summit North America 2024, and there were numerous presentations and panel discussions about how to describe it to your manager that participating in these open source projects is an investment. It's a risk if you don't do that. So to me, it feels like that there is a disconnect
Yep,
somewhere.
absolutely.
What is your experience? Like, have you ever convinced anyone in an organization that this is not like for the greater good to do, but this is the most reasonable thing for us to
Right.
do, for
So
instance?
there's kind of two different ways that you approach that discussion. On the front end, before you do anything, it goes back to that idea I was talking about of build versus buy. Every engineering manager, every product manager understands the build versus buy decision. Are we going to hire developers to write all of that software, or does that component is something we license from somebody else? With an open source licensed bucket of software, you have that ability to do something a little different in the middle, which is this idea of I'm going to borrow that. And all of the changes I make to it as I use that component as a dependency in my product, I need to get those changes back upstream as quickly as possible because I don't want to live on a fork that's becoming more and more brittle as that upstream project continues to evolve, and I'm sitting here with a whole bunch of patches that I have to manage. And so there's this idea of instead of build versus buy, there's this idea of build versus buy versus borrow and share, because I need to be sharing my changes upstream. There is an argument that says, if you're clever about this, and for a long time Google was, if you remember early Google history, Google was reviled in the Linux community because they weren't sharing their changes back to the community. But that's because those differences, like they were differentiating for what Google was doing. And so that idea that they were actually withholding something, they were willing to eat the cost of living on a fork and doing their own complex fork management because it was a differentiator in their business. Most of us don't live like that. Most of us live in the space of, build versus buy versus borrow and share. And even in the Linux space, there was I attended a talk, and at the time, this was back around 2006. Uh, SUSE was owned by Novell at the time, and the Novell product VP, VP of all of their Linux products, he was he laughed because he said in that year he had to go through his own kind of self-education and realization that when he started in this role, it's like, why are you trying to contribute all those changes back? My God, this is our engineering, greatness here, kind of thing. Stop doing that. And he said somewhere, he doesn't know really where, somewhere over that year though, he was suddenly horrified. Why aren't they accepting our changes upstream, kind of thing? That he'd gone through that transition. But I think just approaching the discussion right off from the front of we could build it, we could buy it, or we're going to start with that rich starting point over there and contribute back. But and contributing back. So that's the next part of the discussion. This is the really hard one. And it drives me nuts because I've encountered it inside of Microsoft in the last 7 years. I've seen it in lots of places. And there is still this naive belief that there's this magical community out there that does stuff. And so people will reach into a bucket of open source licensed software, and that's the entire thinking. Well, it was open source licensed. And you've now taken a dependency, possibly on mission critical, business critical software, whether you're an IT shop or whether you're embedding it in customer facing product. And apparently the only thinking you did is, hey, This stuff was free on the internet. And like I try and help folks over that when I'm doing some of the education work in universities. It's like you show them a photograph of a cookie on the ground, and it's like you wouldn't eat the cookie kind of thing. And then you raise that level to, a USB drive, a thumb drive on the ground. It's like you wouldn't plug this into your laptop or your company network. And then you just show them all of the different command lines for, go get npm build. Like it's like all of the ways that we casually allow people to slurp buckets of stuff in, that they never question that dependency. And it's understanding that you have a software dependency now. And okay, so maybe it's a fairly low level dependency. Maybe it really doesn't matter that, you snuffled up a dozen npm packages. But if it starts becoming mission critical, how much do you invest back upstream? And I hate this, you have to give back. No, you don't. It had an open source license on it. Like there is nothing in that exchange that requires me to give back out of some altruistic, hey, I'm making money, I should give some of it back. No, there isn't. License says so. But you have an enormous responsibility to your customers, to your users, even if they're internal users, to be able to support the dependency you just took.
Yep,
And
because the
that's,
license says as is.
yeah. And
So
so
the
it's how do you
obligation
walk your
or
way
lack
back into
of
that?
goes both directions. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, when you look at the dependencies, okay, so is it, Red Hat used to have a rule of thumb. They would not ship anything that they had not proved that they could get a patch upstream. Okay, so that feels like a good minimum bar, especially coming out of the engineering culture at Red Hat. Okay, so this is I've taken a dependency. Did I build it from source? Do I know how to build it? Does it come from a single company that could change the license? These are questions you might ask. Um, as you step into that next thing of, no, this is actually pretty critical. Okay, can you get a patch upstream? I'm not saying are you a maintainer. I'm just saying, could you make a contribution and it landed? Okay, that would seem to be important. Okay, is it so critical? Is this dependency so critical that maybe you actually want to get a lot of patches upstream and become a maintainer? Okay, is it so critical? It's the Linux kernel and you're Red Hat. It's the Linux kernel and you're Microsoft building Azure Linux. Maybe we need a number of maintainers kind of thing. Maybe we need to go join whatever the thing is, whatever that nonprofit structure is. Maybe there's lots of different investments that we should be making around that open source licensed project because it's critical to our borrow and share strategy for how we took those dependencies. And that's the thing, like all of the we should be able to fund our open source developers. I'm not saying it's a lost cause. I just don't see the economics being sustainable. We saw companies try this, and that's where, there's still a couple of companies that are in the current space, but Source Labs failed. Spike Source failed. Um, oh, I'm blanking on the name of the one that actually was the one company that figured out how to support and sustain open source projects for customers for money. They realized that there is no, if you're going to provide an SLA around some of these packages, you need staff. And
Yeah.
so
There's Open Logic, if that's who you were thinking
thank
of,
you.
or
It was Open Logic. Yeah. So Open Logic figured this out, God, 20 years ago almost. And they didn't have a home run kind of exit. They got acquired by Roguewave, I think. When Roguewave finally figured, a dozen years ago that we really need to get on board with this open source stuff, and there seems to be a company here that knows how to do it. So this idea that we're going to create something that could provide an economic structure, for profit or not, that is going to somehow flow money at an SLA level for consumers down to loan developers. It's like, I don't see it.